Today's lesson 11, and we are going to look at implementing the camera in our Android app. So a couple resources I'm just going to point to. In deciding last night whether I was going to try and get all the assignments marked or make up a slide deck for today, I went with the marking. So I worked to try and get all the assignment twos marked. So we have no slide deck. Here's our slide. Here's basically what we're doing today. Here's the process of how this works. I'm going to place special responsibility today on Dhruv and Devanit for helping me debug the camera because you guys successfully used the camera in your app, which was well done. So here's roughly the process of what we're going to need to do. First, we're going to need to enable some permissions in the manifest. We're going to need to indicate that our app needs to be able both to use the camera and external storage. Okay? So this means when users install the app from the Play Store, they may get those prompts that the app will want to use those permissions. So if they don't want to let the app, they can not install it. The other thing that it'll do when we run the app, it'll check if the user's given the app permissions to use those features, and if not, it'll ask the user if the app is allowed to use both the camera and storage. So we'll have to configure that. We also need to configure a file provider. So once we've got permissions to use those other features of the device, we've got to do something with the files that get generated from the camera. So there's some configuration in the manifest here. We'll also need a new XML resource file that'll be used to store, point a path to where those files are going to go. So we'll add a permission check. I think what we'll do is we'll maybe add the ability to take a profile photo. We have our profile activity, which is fairly small. I think there's just the user's name and email. So we've got room on that activity to display a photo and maybe have a button for the user to take a photo. And then the process is a bit complicated. So we're going to use an intent that's going to use an image capture. And then that intent requires an extra, and the extra will be the path to our photo. So we invoke that intent, and then we're going to use this onActivityResult event to determine did we successfully take a photo, yes or no. And if we did, we want to do a few things. We want to display that photo in our activity. We also need to save it to the device. Now, saving it to the device is a bit tricky. There's a simple way of doing it, which kind of works, but we're going to need to do a more complicated version. The simple way works. The challenge with it is we have a permissions issue that the native photo store on Android is like the photos or picture library. But we also want to display a copy that's attached to our app specifically. So we kind of are going to store the photo in two places. We want to store it on the device, so if the user goes to their photos, they can see it. But the app also needs internal permission. So we're going to make an internal copy as well that's owned by our app. And then once we can take a photo and display it, hopefully we'll have time to get to this today. If not, we can do it next week. We also want to update Firebase. So our Firebase user object has a profile photo property that we can read and write. So we want to take a photo, display it in the activity, but then we also want to update the user's profile in Firebase. One thing that's a bit weird is we can't actually see this field anywhere in Firebase. If you go and look in the user's collection, it doesn't show us the photo. And then we want to try and display it as soon as the user comes back to the activity. Anytime we want to grab their profile photo from Firebase and display it. Otherwise, it'll just display one time. If we leave the activity and come back, the profile photo is gone. So we'll try and do all this. The code here is kind of based on this tutorial. This tutorial shows how to use the camera and display a photo, but it doesn't save that photo and it doesn't have any persistence in terms of the database. So that piece we're going to add on ourselves. So that's the plan. Hopefully, we can get a lot Done. So I'm going to open up the project. I will also ensure I get assignment 3 marked prior to the final exam, so you know exactly what your grade is going into the exam. While this is loading, I can actually mention the final exam right now will basically be the exact same format as the midterm. So it will just be an open book practical exam where I'm going to ask you to build an app. And we'll use some more of the features that we've used since the midterm. So we'll focus a little more heavily on second part of the course. All right, so I'm just going to kick off my app. So we can open up while this is loading. It's going to take a little while to do a first load. We can open up our Android manifest. This is going to be the first place we're going to need to make some changes. We can also open up our profile activity, both the Kotlin file as well as the XML resource, because we'll be making some changes. Most of the work we're going to do today is going to go in here. So I'm actually going to close everything else. All I really need is my manifest and the 2 profile files, the .kt file and the .xml file. I may have to cold boot my device. Yep, I think so. Oh, well, okay. I just need to be a little more patient. So we put our terms of use, our scrolling terms of use here. We'll maybe push this down and we can display a photo maybe with the camera button on here. So we can click the camera, maybe we'll put the camera button down here and it'll update the profile image. Or I guess our other option is we can just put in an image view and make it clickable. The user just taps the image, it'll change. think that's what you guys did in your assignment, correct? Okay, we can do it that way. So in the Android manifest, between our manifest tag and an application tag, we want a couple of these tags. We need both a uses feature and a use and some uses permission tags. So we want uses feature, the Android name of Android, permission, camera. And we're saying that it's required. We don't have to make it required. If we, I guess technically a user could run our app without using the camera. They just wouldn't have a profile photo. So it's up to you whether you feel using this external feature is something that's essential to your app or optional. I'll set it as true. It would be okay in our case to use false. And then there's 3 permissions we need. So we need the camera permission, and then we need to both read and write to external storage. Doesn't really matter what order we put them in. So I want to write to external storage, and then the same permission for reading. So this will allow us to use the camera and then actually save a file to the operating system. If we don't have these, we're going to have permission errors. So that's the first addition, these 4 lines. We also need down at the bottom, after our last activity, but this has to go inside our application node. We need to set up a new node called provider. So this has to do with configuring our ability to work with the file system. We have a number of attributes here we need to set up. So our authorities we're saying on whose authority can we access the file system? It will be on the authority of our package name. We could hard code our package name here, but in case our package name changes, it's best to use it as a variable. Our name is this one. We're using the Android X file provider. This is relatively new. If you look at versions that are not too old of working with the Android file system, it uses a different name, a different library, uses, I think, the Android version 4 compatibility library. There's a file provider class in there. But since our app is fairly new, we're going to use Android X, which is newer. We're going to set the enabled property to true. The exported property to false. So by not exporting it, it means other apps don't have access to our app's sort of internal storage. I actually think this may be optional, to be honest with you. I'm not sure we even need this. Hang on, let's look at the docs. It may be able to work even without that. We'll see if we can find the actual docs so I can give you a better answer. That's for .NET using the API. So this is the official doc. We should be able to see all of the attributes here. Sorry. Whether or not the content provider can be instantiated by the system. So we want it to be enabled so the user can use the content provider for saving the file. So we're setting exported to false. So the file storage for any files we create in our app is not accessible to any other app. It's not public. And we also need to set grant URI permissions to true. So this way we can identify a file using a URI to read and write. So we want to set these 5 properties. The order we put them in doesn't matter. And we'll need to refer to this authority later when we're actually creating the file. We need to provide the authority for permissions to access the storage. The other thing we need is we need to set up a file path. So where are the files going to be? So we'll set the name using Android.support. There's our name. And we have to point it to a resource file, which we're going to create. We get this error because we don't have this XML. We don't have this resource file. We're going to create it next. So I'm going to hit Alt Enter and I'm going to create this file. So it'll put it in a directory called XML. Well, that probably wasn't the best way of doing it. Hang on, we've got file path XML. Yep. Actually, I'm going to delete the file. I'm going to create this a different way. I'm going to delete file path. And I'll recreate it. Sorry, yes. Add XML file underscore path. We'll create this. So over here under resources, first let's create an XML directory. So you can just right click the resources folder, make a new directory, or it can be a new Android resource directory, doesn't really matter, and call it XML. And then in my XML file, I'm going to make a new XML resources file. I will call file path. Okay, give me what was here before. So I'm going to make a couple changes. It has this preference screen node. I'm going to change that to say paths. That's the node we want. And then in here, I want to set up an external path. Actually, we can just use this. So now our app has a place to save the files. Basically has its own area in the file system called external files. But it's local to our app. So if we have multiple apps that each have their own file storage system, they're not mixed together. Each app has its own copy of any files that are attached to it. So for example, we could install this app and we could install a separate app. In each app, we might generate a file called profile.jpg, but they're stored individually in the local file system that belong to each app. And one cannot see the other or access the other. So that's where all our configuration happens. We need this file. We need to configure the manifest. Did you guys, is this how you did it in your, did you do anything different? Okay, so rather than, so for the, you're talking about the provider here? Right. Okay, so you just set this up programmatically at runtime when it runs. Okay, so that works. I guess the benefit of doing it here is obviously you don't have to run, we don't have to run through the logic each time we want to use the file system. It's configured globally, but certainly works. And we might want to do it at runtime because this is global. We only have one file path. You may want to set a different path each time. So that works as well. So we're going to go to our profile activity and we're going to set up an image view. We haven't worked with images before, though a lot of you did already in your assignment. So the image view is not terribly complicated, kind of like the Android equivalent of an HTML IMG tag. It's a container. We give it a source. We can set dimensions. It renders an image if we have one, if that image can be found. Now I had kind of planned that we would have an image view and then a separate button to take a photo. I think in yours, you guys just made it that the image view itself was clickable, correct? You click the image view, and if it was clicked, it would then invoke the camera. So maybe I think that's better. So let's go to our profile activity. So maybe in between so here's my profile activity. Maybe we want to put the profile image here. So I'll put it underneath my email, and then we'll have to change the constraint a little bit, because right now our text view, our terms and conditions, appears underneath the email. So we'll change the constraint. So we'll put on an image view. Maybe we'll set the width and height for now. We may have to play around with those dimensions. So we'll set the width as, and height is 200, just for now. Give it an ID. We'll call it image view profile. Whoops. Center it. The setting start and end to the parent. We'll put it below our email. And we'll start there. And then for my text view, rather than anchoring it to the bottom of the email, text view email, I'll anchor it below the image view. So I'll just change that constraint. We'll rerun the app, I'll log back in, we'll see what shows up, if anything. If we don't have anything here, we may need a placeholder or some kind of indicator that it is an image and the user can click it. Yep. So before, the text view was anchored below the text view email. Now we want the text view terms anchored below the image view. Whoops. So there's not actually anything here. We have an image view, but we want some kind of indicator that there is an image and the user can click on it. So what options would we have? What could we do here with our image view? Because there's no indicator that it's actually here. So here's my image view. Actually, I'm not sure it's in the right place now that I look at it. Maybe we better go back and look at our constraints for a minute. I never gave it a top constraint, did I? So our top will be to the bottom of email. Oh, F12, I put, got my constraint wrong. I put bottom to top instead of top to bottom. So it's up there somewhere. So are there any properties here you think we should set to indicate to the user when there's no image here? We have a few options. What could we do so the user knows this is for the profile image and they can click it? There's a few different ways we could handle this. So what should we do to give the user some indicator that there's a placeholder here? Okay, well, let's look if we have a hint attribute. If I select the image view, hint would be good, but unfortunately we don't have hint. There are a few other things we could do though. What else could we do to give the user an indicator there actually is an image here and they can click it to change it? Scroll through the attributes on the right side. We can experiment with a few of these. How could we make this thing visible to the user? Give them an idea what they can do with it. And we don't see it at all. It's here, but it isn't visible. Sorry? Yeah, there's nothing here when we first load it. So there's a few different ways we could indicate in the UI there actually is an image here and users can click it to invoke the camera and change it. Okay, so we could set a default image. Okay. So that's not a bad idea. So maybe we want to do that programmatically. So in our profile activity, maybe on create. So what would we want to set here? How would we do it? So you look through what's here. Okay, well, so let's see if we set an image drawable. Well, maybe we should actually why don't we create a drawable? Actually, we already have. Let's see, we could add a new vector asset here. We've got this add a photo. So we could use that as our default image. If no image shows up, show the user a camera with a plus sign. I'll just change the name to I see add a photo. So we've got our icon here. Let's see if this is the method we want to use. So we had a bunch of them. There were a bunch of options. So we want to dynamically so we can try this, set image drawable. So this will actually give us, this should actually give us the ID. Let's try it with r.drawable. Oh. So I've also got this in the wrong method. I've got it in my create options menu. Usually I assumed our on create would be first. So I will do it right here. Maybe for our toolbar, default profile image. Okay, we've linked to X. We can try this way. Get resources. Get drawable. Okay, let's see if this loads. Now it says this is now deprecated, but we'll see what happens. There's probably a more efficient way to do this. I wonder if it's right now. Get resources. All right, we'll try that. So we don't want to hard code it into the XML because we'll change it if the user actually has a photo saved to their profile event. We want to show that photo This is only in case, in the event we have no photo attached to the user's Firebase profile. Try this, we'll see if it loads, and we're about due for a pause. So we'll go to the profile. So our image is loaded at runtime. I think it's okay here. We may want to move it down a little. We could add a little margin or padding to the top of it just to push it down. Okay. Let's take a break here. I'll push this up to Git. If you're missing anything, you can check it against my version. We'll carry on in a bit.